on love, baby, don't say the answer. Actions speak louder than louder than louder than louder than louder than cages or wings. Which do you prefer? Ask the birds. Fear or love, baby, don't say the answer. Actions speak louder. They speak louder, louder than actions speak louder than.
Hello and welcome to Keen Company. I'm Jonathan Silverstein, the artistic director, and I am so thrilled you've joined us for tonight's After Hours with our special guest, Jennifer Ashley Tepper. For those of you new here, Keen is an off-Broadway theater company in New York City that creates theater that champions identification and connection through stories of the decisive moments that change us. I'd like to start tonight's event with a land acknowledgement. We do this to recognize the long history of the territory where we live and work and its significance for the indigenous peoples who lived and continue to live here, and to demonstrate our commitment to addressing the legacy of colonialism in our work and practices. I am speaking to you today from Brooklyn, which is the traditional land of the Munsee Lenape people. Since our activities tonight are shared digitally to the internet, we'd also like to acknowledge and consider the legacy of colonialization embedded within the technologies, structures, and ways of thinking we use every day. We are using equipment and high-speed internet not available in many indigenous communities. Even the technologies that are central to much of the art we make leave significant carbon footprints, contributing to changing climates that disproportionately affect indigenous peoples worldwide. We invite you to join us in acknowledging this, as well as our shared responsibility to make good use of this time, and for each of us to consider our roles in reconciliation, decolonization, and allyship. Well, let me welcome aboard my plucky partners in crime, Ashley DeGiorgi and Billy Reese.
I love that. I feel like we get a new adjective every time.
Truly, all these SAT words that you're dropping. I love it.
Hey, well, you know, I was a SAT teacher way back when, so the vocabulary kind of comes.
You give off that vibe. You really do. I look at you and I'm like, this guy was a former SAT tutor.
I can't believe we've gotten this deep into After Hours and we're still getting revelations about Jonathan Silverstein.
Truly.
Honestly.
But you know what? It's not about you today, okay?
Yeah, you'll be a guest another week and we'll ask all about your SAT background. Mm-hmm. What'd you get on the SAT, Johnny?
Let's see. I believe I got, this was so long ago. I think I got a 950 on the verbal.
This is what people are here to see. So really remember, take your time.
I think I got a 950 on the verbal and maybe a 900 on the math.
All right, that sounds right.
I have no recollection of even what the scoring system is.
Right on. That's amazing. I thought it was letter grade, so that sounds great, John.
It may have been. This was back in the Stone Ages when we actually used wood. We had to carve our answers into wood.
You had an abacus?
Yes.
So time consuming, I tell you. My God. Well, before we get any more distracted by the SATs, I think we should bring out tonight's guest. I'm so excited. She is a producer. She is a historian. She does it all. She is so smart. I cannot wait to talk to her. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jennifer Ashley Tepper.
Guys, I'm so happy to be here. I was an SAT tutor / teacher. That was my survival job when I graduated. So
of course.
We've already made a connection.
What company, Jennifer?
I tutored at LaGuardia, the FAME school, through Revolution Prep. That was like my day job when I was doing a million things right after I graduated.
Amazing.
Right. More threads of connection. Well, let me introduce Jennifer Ashley Tepper for those of you who do not know her. Jen Yeah, which is no one, exactly, as I was saying that. Jennifer Ashley Tepper is the producer of the musicals Be More Chill, Broadway Bounty Hunter, and Love and Hate Nation. She is also the creative and programming director at Feinstein's 54 Below and the author of the Untold Stories of Broadway book series, of which Volume 4 is being released tomorrow.
So excited.
She's the creator of the Jonathan Larson Project and a historian consultant on the upcoming film version of Tick, Tick, Boom. Now, speaking of Tick, Tick, Boom, this is where the connections and threads begin, because where Keen intersected with Jen is on Tick, Tick, Boom. And I think the first day I met you was at 54 Below when we were doing the preview for the Times, and Sierra Renee sang
Come to Your Senses?
Come to Your Senses, yeah. And I remember you were running around, and I was like, "Hi, I think you're Jen."
Yeah, I remember that so well. God, I miss running around and getting to like meet amazing people for the first time. That was such a cool day. She nailed it.
It was such a beautiful day. And of course, Jen is very good friends and colleagues of her co-stars, Nick Blaemeyer and George Salazar.
Mhm.
And not only were you with us on our first preview when the sound went out, but you came and did an amazing talk back for us as well. And we're just so pleased to have you with us tonight. So welcome, Jen.
Yeah, I'm so pleased to be with you. And those were such magical experiences, all of them. I will never forget that first preview. It felt so, I mean, that was like the epitome of what we love about live theater, right? It was such an incredible first preview, and that just made it even more magical because we all got to kind of reconvene and talk about it and like, you know, have a drink and talk about Jonathan in the lobby. And that talk back, I spoke about that talk back yesterday. So all the connections.
Oh, good.
It was a great talk back, and it was you have so much knowledge of the Jonathan Larson legacy that it was perfect to have you on board.
Yeah, you know, talking to Matt O'Grady, who is Jonathan Larson's very close friend, who, you know, as we know, the character in Tick, Tick, Boom is based on, and George Salazar, my close friend who played the character, I learned a lot. Like, you know, I knew a lot going into that, but it was so great to do the talk back with you guys because there were a few things that Matt's told us, you know, us being me, George, the audience, you guys that day, that I've carried with me and gone like, oh, you know, he spoke about Take Me or Leave Me being the last song that Jonathan ever wrote before he passed, and like spoke about that from a personal perspective that really I've never forgotten.
Wow, that's great. I love the talk back moderator can learn things, not only the audience.
If you're asking good questions, I feel like you're always learning at the same time as the audience too.
Definitely.
Good point. So let's begin by asking you a question. So tell us a little bit about growing up and maybe where your love of theater came from.
I grew up in Boca Raton, South Florida, where the average age is, you know, about 75, which I say love because the elderly population down there really creates this thriving theater community. You know, like I went to a public high school that had an incredible theater department because, you know, every time we did a musical, our 800-person auditorium would be filled for 8 performances with the older retirement community. So things like that. And obviously, you know, they go to see a lot of tours and regional theater. So there's a lot of thriving tours and regional theater. And because of that, you know, pretty much everyone in my family is in medicine in one way or the other. You know, my dad's a doctor, my mom's an occupational therapist, but like loved theater and took me to the theater and sent me to theater camp and, you know, bought me 8 cast albums for Hanukkah. And that's a true fact. Because, you know, we're surrounded by so many great local theater opportunities in South Florida. I only got to come to New York 3 times before I moved here to go to NYU. But I learned about theater so much from afar and was just like reading all about it. And I think I put on my theater historian hat pretty early because I was like, I don't get to see this show, but I'm going to read the liner notes like a lot of us who, you know, grew up away from New York. So that was kind of my growing up, becoming a theater kid journey.
Do you remember the first show you ever saw?
The first show I ever saw, we saw the tours of A Chorus Line and Fiddler very close to each other. So those were both very, you know,
Heavy hitters.
But it was really, it was my first summer at theater camp and getting to do Annie that like really honestly like bit me with the bug and, just made me want to start learning everything I could about theater.
Mm-hmm.
Annie. Oh my gosh. How many young girls got bitten by the bug?
So many. And I have to say, it was so funny. I was doing this like really wonderful podcast recently called Two Kids and a Broadway Star, which are these two like brilliant young girls that I met at Broadway Con who are 10 and 11 years old. And they do this very smart podcast. And we were talking about Annie and, getting bit by the theater bug. And I shared that I played the butler Drake when I made my Annie debut.
Sure.
And they were like, wow. And then they were like, we both done Annie and we were Annie and Lily. And I was like, man, like I can't believe I'm talking to an Annie and a Lily. I was just a Drake. So even generations apart, it was so cool to be like, oh, we've all had that experience. My sister's first show she was in was Annie and she was Molly. So it's like, what was your guys' Annie journey? Did you ever do Annie?
I never did Annie, and I think about that often, but I also am I was such a diva, and I was like, the female roles are better. There's no role for me in Annie that'll really let me shine. So, I don't have that many regrets, but I do find it puzzling that I never had the opportunity.
You didn't want to be the butler Drake? That's the third lead in Annie.
Yeah.
I thought about it.
Yeah, you turned it down.
Next revival, I'll go in for it.
Yeah, for sure.
Mm.
So you went to so you came to NYU, and all right. So you are like the connector of all connectors. So how did the connector of all connectors start connecting? Was it in school? Once you graduated?
Yeah, I went to NYU. I went to Tisch for dramatic writing, which I did because I loved theater and I loved writing. And there wasn't really a major to be like a theater historian or like. Yeah. I did want to work in making new musicals happen, but, I wouldn't have been a business major to learn, it was just like a weird, I'm going to carve my own path journey that I had at NYU. And I really did make the city my campus, as cliched as it sounds. I ran around seeing every show I could and taking notes on things that were changing in previews with these productions, people that I grew up worshiping in Florida, but and nobody I knew. I didn't know anyone in professional theater. And I pursued a lot of internships. I interned at the York Theater. I interned at the Rodgers and Hammerstein organization. I eventually interned with the writers of Title of Show, which was really how I got my professional start when the show went to Broadway. And so I started making connections, I would say, during that time from kind of writing a lot of cold letters to people, dropping them off at stage doors, all kinds of things. I produced a show at NYU because in dramatic writing, which, was all playwrights and screenwriters who I loved being around, but just like today, I love being around writers, but I didn't want to do playwriting or screenwriting. And I was like, I really miss being around theater, musical theater people. So I produced a kind of song cycle show on campus, which certainly was planting some seeds for things I would do later. And actually, my good friend from college, J. Armstrong Johnson, who I've now worked with for many years, choreographed it and was in it, and I directed and produced it. And what was really cool about that actually was that I invited a lot of the writers who had material in the show to come talk to us. And I was like, we're just a bunch of NYU kids, but would love for you to come see the show or talk to us. And so many people, Marvin Hamlish came and spoke to us, which wow. I know, I have voicemails from him still, which, it was Marvin Hamlish. I didn't know Marvin Hamlish.
Yeah.
It was the most generous. It was my first experience with being sometimes you just have to reach out. And also, Brian Loudermilk came and he's, my generation, but I didn't know them before. So there were so many cool things that came out of that.
That's amazing.
If you could reverse engineer, I think a lot of maybe young people are in the situation where they kind of know what they want to do, but they go to a school or a track and sort of piece together themselves. If you could reverse engineer theater producer historian major, what kind of classes would people take?
That's a great question. I feel I loved taking classes during college that were really specific things that didn't necessarily have to do with obviously I'm all musical theater all the time, but I've been thinking a lot about this class that I took in college that was Black cinema in the 1960s. And I was the really specific, or I took a class on the history of NYU at the beginning of the 20th century, things like that were really oddly specific that, for me, I was happy to learn about musical theater history by kind of studying it myself. Even though I did take some really great musical theater history classes, it was really classes in different things that opened up my brain to I know about it all that, I would love to rewind and take even more of them.
Were your parents sad you didn't become a doctor?
Not even a little bit. Not even a little bit. I would say my parents like love theater and always have as much as one can when one isn't in it at all. But you know, my dad during quarantine will like live text me like watching Broadway HD. It's like that level. But I think they knew from a pretty young age when I would like scream every time I got a shot that I wasn't going to be a doctor.
You set them up, yeah. And,
Yeah.
and Florida too also has, I mean, you were talking about that, but they have such a thriving thespian society down there too. They're like one of the few states where it's just huge.
Yeah, I'm judging virtual thespians right now, which has been
really?
so moving. I've just been crying on this very couch as I watch. But thespians was huge. I mean, it was like one of the most influential things in my life. Florida thespians is even bigger than nationals. There's like, when I would go, it would be 10,000 theater kids descend on the city of Tampa. And for a week, just like do all things, compete and like do main stage productions and take workshops. It's like the most inspiring thing. And every year I go back and judge and I'm like, this is still my favorite thing of all time.
That is amazing. What's the most popular song that they're doing for competition this year?
I love that question. You know, I'm judging the group musical room, so it's like I can only say what group musical. But one of the most popular things for sure is "Come From Away," which totally makes sense because I love "Come From Away." First of all, but second of all, it's like everyone kind of gets to play an individual character. Like all these great group numbers. But it's unbelievable to me to watch these students who weren't born during 9/11 singing about 9/11 during a pandemic in their own bedrooms while connecting with each other. I mean, I'm just sobbing truly watching these.
That's crazy.
Wow.
I'm so excited to hear that these things are still happening virtually.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
It's honestly been, I've been judging like very fairly, but it's been tempting to me to not give everyone a perfect score this year because I'm like,
Yeah.
fantastic. I love you all.
I love it.
Can you tell us a little bit about meeting Joe Iconis and your sort of work with Joe?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's so crazy how long it's been. Joe and I have been collaborators and like closest of friends for over a decade now. I became obsessed with Joe's work actually when I was an intern at the York. I discovered in like an old dusty box, as we do, a demo that had some songs of his, and was like, who is this guy that is writing? You know, it was Helen, the song like Helen's and Skinflicks, which is in Things to Ruin. It was like Blue Hair. It was a bunch of Joe's early stuff that I was like, this is incredible. Like, who is this guy? Started seeing some of his shows, like wrote him a Facebook fan letter about his lyrics. And really it was one of our co-producers, Untitled Chapter, Sarah Katz, was producing a 5-performance run of Things True in its second stage. And I was like, oh my God, I'm obsessed with that guy and that family of artists. Like, can I assist you? Can I get coffee? Can I like do anything? And she said yes. And that was 2009. And ever since then, you know, we immediately bonded, and I bonded with so many members of the family of artists. And we've like worked on absolutely everything together since then. You know, it was such an important time and like really created so many important connections. But you know, that's been more than 10 years. And it's like every musical, every project, every like recording, I've been around in some capacity, whether as producer or, you know, like working on marketing or, you know, the original Love and Hate Nation at Penn State, I was like the dramaturg. So it's really exciting kind of having this like family of artists that we have where, you know, I think it's actually one of the coolest things about it. Like we were on Broadway and I was like, oh, you know, like Danielle Gimbel, another close friend of ours and collaborator of the family, was like our copyist in the music department. And then we'll do like another project and she'll be on stage, or like, you know, we'll do one project where someone's a musician and another where they're a performer. And it feels like very Steppenwolfian, but like in the realm of like new musical theater. So it's just been really like an incredible like 10+ year journey.
That is so exciting.
What drew you to new musicals? Was there something as a kid where you like discovered something, or were you always just kind of putting connections together when you wanted to see how things were made?
Yeah, I always loved the idea of like working on brand new things and like with people who were making stuff now. At the same time as I was obsessed with theater history and specifically underappreciated musicals. So, I mean, it felt like I always wanted to do that. But when I met Joe, it was the moment where it was like, oh, this like clicks. And this is, you know, it's been so great to kind of have a long-term collaboration of like growing together while creating new stuff. Yeah, definitely.
It's lovely. I know, you know, everyone talks about that it's really a family and that's sort of a collaboration. Do you feel like it's kind of, that's like your artistic home a little bit? Or, because I know you're associated with so many organizations and you've, you know, dabbled in so much.
Definitely. It really does feel like a family. Like, I know that, a lot of times people will do concerts, and Joe talks about this too, where it's like so-and-so and friends or whatever it is. And it's like, that's great, but like those people aren't actually friends. And the amount of like years and kind of like embedded we have all become in each other's work is great. But I will say also that like the family is something where, when we had 2019, where we were doing Be More Chill and Broadway Bounty Hunter and Love and Hate Nation all in one year, like the best part of having the family was inviting new people into it. And like every time, it's not just about like, hey, we just do stuff with this like small group of people. The best thing about the family is that it just grows and grows. That's why the Christmas show started out as 12 of us and now it's like 80. So we would be in auditions and, everyone auditions. It's not like, hey, this person is in the family, so they have the role. It's like, oh, this new person is so great. Let's welcome them into like this family of artists that we like expand and cultivate. And it was really interesting kind of talking to new members of the family and being like, hey, like, do you feel welcome? Or like, how can we make you feel part of this? And people going, no, this like foundation that you guys have created of like this magic sauce where everybody's kind of part of the collaboration is really nice to walk into on day one and like become part of. Even if, I'm sure sometimes it's a little like, oh, I'm the new person. I was talking to Alan H. Green, who's our leading man in Bounty Hunter and who we've worked with for 6 years the other night. And he was like, I still feel like a new member of the family. And I was like, but yeah, no, it's a unique group of artists that I'm really grateful to be part of all the time.
We call ourselves a team, but we are not friends. Just publicly can't stand each other.
I was going to say I'm glad you mentioned it, but the thing I missed the most about the Christmas season was not being able to see the Christmas show this year. That was, oh my God. It's like, it is my favorite show every year. It's so much fun. And it is such a perfect encapsulation of this feeling of community that you guys built in the family, like even just like for me as an audience member, you feel like you're a part of it, It's so special.
I remember looking you in the face like last year, or maybe the year before, and thinking, I was so happy to see you there. But one thing I loved was that the year we skipped was 13. So that felt like correct.
That feels apt. That feels very apt. Yeah.
No reason. Yeah. How did your relationship with 54 Below dovetail into all of this?
What's crazy about that is that I really got my job at 54 Below because of Joe, which is true of pretty much every full-time job I've had, ironically. And not ironically, it's like for a reason. But we were doing the Christmas show, and we started doing the Christmas show at Ars Nova. And one year, Ars Nova was not available because they had a main stage production, and 54 Below had just opened. This was like 2012. And Joe and I were like, oh, cool. We could maybe do it at that new upscale nightclub. It looks really awesome. The original programming director there was Phil Bond, who we worked with at the Beachman, which is the first place I ever produced concerts, like If It Only Runs a Minute. And so we knew them. We did the Christmas show at 54 Below. It was great. And a couple months later, Phil, the original programming director, was like, oh, I want to move back into just like producing shows, not being the programming director. And the owners of 54 Below were like, oh, we want that woman who produced crazy Joe Iconis Christmas show. Let's talk to her. So it was because they saw me do Joe's work there, and also because Phil knew me from doing stuff, including Joe's work at the Beachman, that I got my job at 54 Below, which immediately, I was thinking about this recently, one of the first things like I started producing when I got to 54 Below was Hit List, the musical and concert of like the fictional musical from Smash, so which included Joe's songs. So it's all connected to the Iconis and family world.
How important do you think those kind of like concert supper club venues are to new musicals? Very important, which obviously I'm not unbiased in saying that. But one of my favorite things when I was first, living in New York was not just going to Broadway shows, but going to Joe's Pub and going to the Beachman and seeing new writers, but also writers who were not new, just doing their songs for the first time. And, performers singing songs that like came from them as opposed to like them in musicals. And I think there's something so incredibly special about concerts and cabaret in how, personal it is, and also being a part of the theater ecosystem. Like I consider it all part of that. And so I could think being away from it a while has really made me, realize even more how special it is. And I'm excited to get back to all of it. Yeah, I feel like you and I think are the same generation, that we were just sort of the beginning of shows being on, or songs being on YouTube, song cycles being on YouTube, and being like, what is this? Just like happening upon someone singing, and those things sort of blowing up in a crazy way, which I feel like 54 Below is a huge like part of people's careers now because of those kinds of videos.
Totally. I always used to somewhat facetiously be like, YouTube is the new Tin Pan Alley. But it's true. Like it's, YouTube was such a big part of like this new generation of artists, the same way that a lot of social media and like, all the TikTok musical of it all, but it changes all the time. But the way that new writers get discovered, it's always, whether it's like on, Tin Pan Alley or on the internet. But the YouTube of it all was interesting because from the first concerts I produced, it was like, I want to do If It Only Runs a Minute because I want to celebrate underappreciated musicals and bring writers and actors together to like redo them. But it was also like, I want this to be on YouTube. Like I want some kid like me in Florida who like might be interested in learning more about Dear World to be like, oh, a YouTube video about Dear World. And that applies to, again, like underappreciated older musicals. It applies to Joe. It applies to like all amazing new writers like Billy. I'm like, please, like the YouTube of 54 Below is like so exciting to me when I go to bringing it full circle again to Florida Thespians, because I'll be talking to these high schoolers in Florida like I was, who will go like, oh my God, Jen Tepper, I love 54 Below. And I'll be like, oh, what have you seen there? And it's just YouTube. And I'm like,
sure.
Like, not that I hope they all come to New York and see it in person one day, but it's like the fact that work and songs and performers and writers can reach people because of YouTube. I mean, I find it inspiring all the time.
Yeah, we were talking to Adam Guan about this a couple months ago when we had him on the show. And like, I was like the generation of, I don't know, so much of like what I think of as new musical theater writers, I think of because of those YouTube videos that I saw, I sort of like model like my career path after, all these writers now who are like, whatever, 10, 15 years older than me, but because I discovered them on YouTube years ago, like I distinctly remember like seeing the early like Pasek and Paul stuff and the early Joe stuff and the early Adam Guan stuff on YouTube and being like, oh my God, that's what I want to do. Like I want to play in those cabaret spaces, so we have to protect them now more than ever,
Yeah.
That is where the next generation is going to come from,
Something that really inspires me too, though, to think about, like, I remember also writing an article years ago called Richard Rogers Was a New Musical Theater Writer, just to kind of be like, yeah, like every new musical theater writing generation had their version of this, which I think is so interesting. And when I was creating the Jonathan Larson project, my whole goal was like, I want to make the like new musical theater writer song cycle he might have made if he had. And I don't think I would have been able to create that if I hadn't like worked so much with Joe and other new musical theater writers and done that kind of like new musical 54 stuff. Because it was like, I feel like I'm a better historian because I'm a producer and vice versa of having to like think about those things.
Absolutely.
Will you talk about, for people who don't know, the series If It Only Runs a Minute and how that kind of started and what's it about?
Oh yeah, I know. I keep like saying it tonight, and because I'm like, oh,
we know. Yeah,
we know what it is.
We know.
Yeah, the title is like a reference to a lyric from my favorite musical, Merrily Roll Along. But around the same time as I was SAT tutoring and also starting to work with Joe for the first time, I also created If It Only Runs a Minute, which is a concert series celebrating underappreciated musicals, where we've done almost 20 editions by now, and we've never repeated like a musical. So each time it's like 15 different underappreciated musicals that had a short run off Broadway or on Broadway or like just have been forgotten in different ways, and we get people to come who originated the material to recreate it. Also like writers coming and telling stories, also new people interpreting the material for the first time. And we always try to do a couple songs that were never recorded, that never got cast recordings, so those can be on YouTube. We were actually right before quarantine happened about to do our first like special edition, which is to see the one, which was celebrating the underappreciated musicals of Hal Prince, which we will definitely do at some point when things start back up. And I was so excited about that because normally I think one of the special things we do is like you're coming to a version of If It Only Runs a Minute, and it's like, oh, here's, a show from 1930 and here's a show from 1975, and they're like really varied. But I think doing like a themed one for Hal is really cool because, obviously the man had endless like landmark shows and changed musical theater and hits, but looking at all of his shows that like didn't happen to run for as long, it's so interesting to see throughout his career like the risks that they took and the way that they were part of his career at the same time as the hits. So I'm excited to get back to that.
It's fascinating because, of course,
songs from Rosa.
Yeah.
We will be doing Rosa, but one of my discoveries, which like truly the last night, like my big night, I know we all have our version of this before the quarantine, was winning like this Lincoln Center Emerging Artist Award, which was so cool. But like the highlight of that night, other than the honor of winning the award, was like Jason Robert Brown telling me stories about the Petrified Prince, which is this like hard to believe there was like Hal Prince, Michael John LaCusa. I won't even start naming the cast members because it was like 20 people that all four of us like love at the public.
That was never recorded.
And like not recorded, you know? And so getting to hear stories about that and putting that in the If It Only Was a Minute, I'm like, we have an unrecorded, fascinating Hal Prince musical to talk about.
Hal Prince, I mean, his flops too are so much more interesting than your average flop. Like I feel like because even if they were bad, like you see where the brilliance was in it, like in the idea, you know, what the log line was, you know. I mean, it's so fascinating. Oh, I can't wait for that.
Of course. Merrily being my favorite show, and like from the moment I heard it as a kid in Florida, being like, oh, like it doesn't matter how long something runs for, like this could be my favorite, or something that ran for 10 years could be my favorite. It doesn't like negate the, you know, quality of the art. And there's only, I mean, this is shout out to Nick Blameyer from King Company's Tick Tick Boom, but Nick Blameyer once said something to me like, there's no you know, there's no bad musicals, there's just musicals you love and musicals someone else loves. And I've like adopted that myself as like, I think that's really true.
That is a beautiful thing to say, and it doesn't surprise me that it came from Nick Blameyer.
Neither.
So can you tell us a little bit about the Jonathan Larson project and how that all came to be? It was so beautiful. What a beautiful, beautiful evening that was.
Thank you. Yeah, you know, I've always loved Jonathan Larson's work so much, and from, you know, obviously growing up as a kid, I have to always say, like, I was Mimi popping out of a pile of rent playbills on my bat mitzvah sign-in board, so it goes far. Yeah, but grew up very much like influenced by Rent and Tick Tick Boom, and I really wanted to kind of create. Well, first of all, this started when Encore's Off Center did Tick Tick Boom. I did a lobby concert, which was like Unheard Jonathan Larson, which was like a few songs that people didn't know in the lobby before a performance. And at that point, I started talking to the Larson family and estate about expanding that into like a full concert, which became the Jonathan Larson Project. So it had always been a dream of mine to kind of do a night of his unheard work, but it evolved into like years of research. Once I started doing research at the Library of Congress, I realized like, oh, there are so many hours of tape, and like to be a responsible historian, to do this the way I want to do it, I have to listen to everything. I have to read everything. And I would discover these like incredible songs, like, you know, the opening number of the Jonathan Larson Project, Green Street, and the closing number, Piano, were both songs he wrote in 1983 when he was 23 years old that, you know, his family, like Julie Larson, shout out, like they're the most incredible. I mean, the way that they've carried on the legacy, and so many of his friends are like incredible. And like, it was so great to talk to them. And when I discovered those two songs, like most people hadn't heard them. Like there were songs that I discovered that, you know, Julie would be like, oh, he loved that song, or, you know, she was so helpful throughout. But when I would find things in the boxes of the library that nobody knew that I thought were like unbelievable, it was such a, you know, revelation to me. And also like, oh, people have to hear these and I have to listen to everything. So anyway, so it evolved into, you know, this evening that we premiered at 54 Below in, you know, the end of 2018 with Nick Blameyer, George Salazar, Andy Miantis, Chris Rodriguez, and Lauren Marcus, orchestrated by my brilliant collaborator, Charlie Rosen, who the two of us would, you know, again, listen to these demos of like Jonathan at a keyboard in 1983 and go, you know, and for me, all my references are musical theater. So bless Charlie for being like, oh, this sounds a little bit like The Police. And me being like, teach me what The Police is. A lot of that, and our amazing Restaurant musical team, and kind of, again, creating like the song cycle or new musical theater concert we thought he always would have wanted to make if he had made it himself. And a lot of the songs are like incredibly political. You know, I was going back and forth to DC during a crazy time. I discovered The Truth Is a Lie, which is Jonathan's song, like essentially about fake news, the weekend after, I won't say his name, was elected. And so that was an insane time to be like in Washington, DC with security everywhere being like, oh, Jonathan Larson, like, about this. It was incredible. And so it was so fun to like premiere it. We made an album. At the time of quarantine, we were definitely, you know, pursuing next steps of like expanding it into a theatrical evening. We'll see where it goes, but we definitely wanted to have further life. And those nights at 54 Below were like among the most special of my life. It was so cool.
Oh my God. I remember how sold out it was. And I got, you know, snuck in like the way back corner just because everybody, I mean, it was so beautiful to see everybody finally able to appreciate these songs that, you know, you had appreciated, you know, in secret for, it was, yeah, fantastic. I'm curious what kind of shows you think Jonathan Larson might have written after Rent, had he survived. I don't know if that's something you've ever thought about. But.
No, that's a great question. And it also is something that came up at the Matt O'Grady talkback, which I've thought about because it was interesting to hear Matt talk about that too. Matt said that night, which was before I did the bulk of this Larson Project research, that he thought the next thing Jonathan would have written would have been extremely political. Rent and Tick Tick Boom are obviously political, but he thought it would have been, it could have been about like the election cycle or like about something very deliberately political. And the more that I dug into the research, the more I knew that was true. So much of the stuff in the Larson Project, there's a song called White Male World. There's, again, a song about like fake news. There are all of these political things that definitely made their way, again, into all the musicals. But I for sure think it would have gone in that direction.
It's incredible. Are there things that you're drawn to that you want to, it seems like you said time and time again, sort of like uncovering things or making sure the world sees more things and like getting it to the people. Is that sort of your driving force as a historian, or are there certain projects or writers or types of things that you're drawn to?
Definitely. One of the other most influential things as I was growing up was the book Not Since Carrie, which I know a lot of us theater nerds love. Ken Mandelbaum's book on underappreciated musicals, where he was literally like, I'm going to take everything that ran for less than 300 performances on Broadway and just kind of show some fun facts about it. I'm diminishing it almost because it's truly one of my favorite books of all time, but there's something in the DNA of that book that embedded itself in me that made me be like, oh, I want to, at this For Below, we did Rachel Lee Rosenblum in concert, which was a show that closed in Broadway previews and hadn't been seen since the night in 1973 when it closed in previews. And something about unearthing those things at the same time as being like, let's make new things that are, brand new today. I really love very much, if in the dream world that we all play where we can buy any theater and do anything, I would love to turn the Edison back into a Broadway theater and do all of these underappreciated musicals, including all the ones that closed in previews. That I think is so special because, in doing those kinds of things, you really do realize again that it's this could be someone's favorite show. There's no reason that something is, running a number of performances does not portend quality necessarily at all.
You said Merrily is your favorite musical, but are there any other flops that you were really particularly moved by?
Definitely. That was the thing too, though. It was growing up not in New York and being away from it, all was the cast recordings to me. So, Rent obviously is a huge hit and I love Rent and I love a chorus line. So it wasn't even I love this because it's a flop. It was almost it's all equal playing ground. But so many. I mean, they're the two musicals I think about a lot because they haven't been in New York in recent years that I want to see are Smile and The Human Comedy. Those two shows are favorites I talk about a lot. But honestly, just so many.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Ashley.
I was going to say, you're so right that the cast recording is sort of in terms of how people learn about things and hear the music, that's all about the cast recording. And obviously, as a kid, you have no idea how long something ran or didn't run. You don't know what a flop is at all. All you know is the music in front of you. Was that, knowing the importance of cast recordings, has that been instrumental? And as you're producing new musicals, you're always trying to get to that cast recording, obviously it was a huge catalyst for Be More Chill.
Definitely. Which is honestly, if a musical happens and it doesn't get a cast, it's almost it doesn't exist, which it doesn't, get regional productions. It doesn't get school productions. There aren't new people discovering it all the time. And so, cast albums are so expensive to make, but it's almost the musical didn't happen if you don't have one. So it's one of the reasons why, with Rent and Minute, we're let's perform songs that have been recorded. A YouTube is not the same as a cast album, but it's something that can be there. And there's a musical that Kicks, the Showgirl musical, the Tom Ian, Alan Menken Lost show. That's one during quarantine that I keep coming back to because there's a couple songs from it I Want to Be Your Rockette and These Are the Good Times that have been recorded. And that's one that it's if we're making our list of 10 non-recorded dream shows, that would be on mine. But really it came from loving writers, I'm sure that I discovered that because, I Want to Be a Rockette was somewhere, but it was also what else did Alan Menken and Tom Ian write? I love their other shows. And constantly, this is such a weird thing to share, but there was a week, a couple years ago where I had the flu and I discovered the Maltby and Shire musical, How Do You Do, I Love You. And it was the best flu of my life. I spent a week being delirious on cold medicine and pretending it was the 60s and I was in the bootleg. I said bootleg, I know. But the reason that this is a weird thing to say was because honestly, when we all thought that quarantine was going to be like 2 weeks, I was like, this will be another how do you do I love you. I was like, I'll just find a bootleg and pretend I'm in it. But sometimes I'll find shows like that where I'm like, if this could only like have been recorded or be recorded now, I just want people to hear it.
And how poetic is it too? I mean, I'm sure you've thought about this, but it's so you that, you know, Be More Chill came to Broadway primarily because of the power of the cast album, you know? That's fantastic.
You know, we've thought about it and like talked about it enough to kind of have all these different perspectives on it now. And I do think that like the perfect timing of like, obviously like the work being great and what it is, but like the internet existing in a certain way, you know, people discovering it and loving it, but actually having the tools to tell people about it. It makes me think of like, I think about like Songs for a New World a lot. And like, if the internet existed in 1996, would that album have taken off, you know, in the way? So it's interesting to just think about like the timing of events, which isn't to say that I don't think, you know, Be More Chill would have taken off in some way. But again, it goes back to the like new musical theater writers in different eras, like how things go viral.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
So we often have a lot of young people listening in, and I'm curious what kind of advice you would give to someone who maybe they don't live in New York, they love theater, and they want to become involved.
Yeah. You know, first of all, it's like, bless everyone and young people for like surviving this time and like do stuff right now, because like it's all I think about is like, I just want everyone to like be able to do that right now. I think that like finding your group of people is so important, and that's not, you know, canceled just because we're in quarantine. Like, I think that something people can be doing right now is like getting involved, obviously, in like, you know, streaming stuff at their local theaters and like connecting with other theater people virtually, like any way that things are safe to do right now, like do them in your own community, you know, that kind of thing. Also, I think like so much of it is teaching yourself new stuff about theater. So like in this moment, like all the things we've been talking about, like listening to cast albums, like reading books about theater, teaching yourself something new in regards to theater. And theater, you know, will be back, and then you'll just have like a stronger vocabulary and knowledge and like all of those things. I also really think that like the next era, I think, is going to be so exciting. You know, I keep talking about like our roaring 20s, and I think the transition is going to be tricky, and like there's a lot of difficult stuff for like every theater company, every venue, but like people miss it. Like people are always going to want to be in rooms telling stories together. People are going to want to go back to it. I can't imagine like once Broadway is safe, and not just Broadway, but theater all over New York, people are going to be like, oh my God, I want to go back to New York. It's been so long. So it's going to come back. And all of that said, it's like theater has always been made from like, you know, scrappy things that get discovered. And like the next big Broadway musical could be something that a bunch of young people are doing in a parking lot right now. Like you just have to make the stuff, and no matter what level it gets to, like making the stuff is the good thing, and you never know. So, you know, again, like none of that is canceled. We can be kind of being in, I can never say that word. We can keep persevering and like doing it whatever ways we can until we can do it in person again.
Mm-hmm.
That is great advice, because I think everyone has become scrappy this past year, in every way, shape, and form, to be creative and keep working or keep creating.
Mm-hmm.
So true. And it's also, though, it's like there's obviously a lot that goes around also of like, we're in a pandemic, don't feel like you have to write the great American novel. And I think that's also so true too, for young people and for everyone. It's like, you know, so much of this is like, I think years from now, I'll be talking to some musical theater writer, and it'll be like, oh yeah, I had that idea during quarantine. I didn't write it until 2022. You know, it's not all like be productive, like be in your isolation, but like write the great American musical. Like so much of it is like nurturing yourself so that like you can be the artist you need to be when we come out of this.
Now, ironically, you did write a book in quarantine. But it's a part of a volume series, so maybe it was worked on in quarantine as well. Tell everyone about the next edition.
Totally. I held it up earlier, and it's like, this is actually the proof copy. So like, it's not, this is the copy.
It'll look even more exciting than that. Yeah.
Yeah, so I did write a book during quarantine, but I will say that like a lot of the work on it was done pre-quarantine, and sometimes it was like unbelievably challenging to be in isolation with theaters empty and writing this book. But the Untold Stories at Broadway, there are going to be 6 volumes eventually. This is volume 4, and each volume takes readers through a bunch of different Broadway theaters through people's personal stories who I've interviewed. So I've interviewed about 300 theater professionals at this point, and it's like producers, directors, writers, and also like people who aren't interviewed as often, musicians and stagehands and door people and all kinds of people who make the theater their home. And so this volume, most of the interviews were done pre-quarantine, but the actual writing of it was done during. And in addition to like all the interviews, it's so many like essays by me and like personal discoveries and like history of shows in the theaters. And so this book, there are just so many stories in it that like I've been waiting for years for people to hear. Are like just incredible. This is the book where I finally did, each book has, again, like a bunch of current Broadway theaters and then one lost Broadway theater that's like demolished or no longer. And this was the book where I finally got to do the 5 Broadway theaters that were demolished to build the Marriott Marquis in 1982. So getting to dive into those and getting to like tell stories from people who were there about the protests and the shows that they did there before they were, destroyed and things like that is one reason like I love this book. But truly, it's just like this book is thick. Like it's so much more thick than the other ones because I really like, honestly, with so many things we've been going through during this time, there were so many discoveries we wanted to share that like are very parallel. There's a lot in here about the Federal Theater Project, like artists doing work during the Great Depression. There's like a lot of work about like, racist practices in theater and like sexist practices in theater and, problematic reviews and radio plays and people going like, why would people go to theater when they could see it or hear it in their homes? Oh, wait, like all these weird things that came up in doing research and interviewing people that I was like, people can draw their own parallels or not, but it's like there was so much that was relevant to this time that we really dove into.
Was that a dream of yours when you were younger that you were going to write a book?
Definitely. And it actually, from the time I worked on Title of Show at the Lyceum, I thought like, oh my God, like the Lyceum was really the inspiring thing for me with the Untold Stories of Broadway, where I was like, someday, I was 22 at that point. I was like, someday I'm going to write a book and write about the Broadway theaters in the way that like I loved At This Theater, but I wanted like a personal version of that because I would go into a Lyceum dressing room and I would be like, I just want to know everyone who had this dressing room and like all of the musicals before we did Title of Show, like what were those musicals like? And it was based on the, specific space. And then, so I was like, that'll happen someday. And it was only like meeting my now publishers, Brisa and Roberta, and them going, oh, we're a publishing company. Do you want to pitch us a book? I was like, oh no, like I'll write this book when many years from now. But instead I ended up kind of writing it at a, younger age. And it actually, that's been a part of the journey as well, because I do think that having written that, like started writing these books, like being, in my mid 20s, they're different than this book, which I, wrote years after that. And you can tell, like, I call it gonzo journalism, which is a little bit inspired by the Hunter S. Thompson of it all and like Joe Iconis writing a Hunter S. Thompson musical, but like they're not like kind of reference books, they're very personal histories. And it's like when I'm like crying over Hal Prince in this book, it's like I'm in the story for better or for worse. And that might be some people's jam and some not. But so me growing up and like starting to work on Broadway is like embedded in the text in a way that I think is, maybe relatable to some people.
Can you tell us? Oh, sorry, Ashley.
No, please.
No, can you tell us which theaters are in this one?
Definitely. So the Imperial, the Jacobs, the Minskoff, the Golden, the Friedman, Studio 54, and the Lost theaters that I mentioned. And so there's so much, the Golden gives us like falsettos is in this volume and the Normal Heart Revival, and then Avenue Q. I mean, every theater that I think about that's in this book, it's like you get a lot of the shows that are like, oh my God, like we're at the Imperial, so we're talking about Fiddler and Pippin, but you also get like, hey, like, oh, I never knew about, there was a show that I discovered at Studio 54 that when I discovered it and wrote about it last year, I talked about it for 2 weeks, this show called Medicine Show, which was about, it was basically about public health and about universal health insurance in like 1940. It was like a protest piece, and it closed quickly. But when I started reading about it, I was like, oh my God, like I can't believe that. And people like loved it and like took to the streets talking about it. And it was like circumstantially that it closed. So the book is filled with like, oh, it's the Jacobs. So we're getting like, the hits of the Jacobs. And then also like the more obscure, interesting shows there too.
Oh, I can't wait to read it. Oh, I'm so excited. Tell us where we can get a copy.
Yes.
Yes. So in lieu of like us all going somewhere in person, you can definitely order it at Amazon. It is both a hard copy and a Kindle option. You can order it at Dress Circle Publishing. Once the world reopens, I think you'll be able to get it at more in-person bookstores too. But for now, yeah, it's Amazon. It's always so funny because this is very like superficial in a funny way. But every time a new book comes out, I'm always excited to be like, oh my God, the book's number 8, it's number 7, it's number whatever in the like Broadway musical section. And this year, my book happens to like have come out when the number 1 and number 2 are Hamilton and Julie Andrews. So my book will never get above 3.
That's a good company to keep, though.
Yes, the best company to keep. And I was like, this is amazing and so funny. But in a time where like usually people will be somewhat buying it in person, somewhat online, it's like everyone's buying it on Amazon, and I'm never going to be those two.
Right. Well, I'm excited in like 100 years for an intern at a theater to like blow the dust off one of your books, and that's going to be their sort of version of finding cassette tapes of Joy Canis in a basement somewhere.
I hope so. Yeah, that's been also an interesting thing about this time when like we pivoted to do a lot of things virtually, but books are still books. Like a book is still the same. And even though like I would love nothing more than to be kind of like in person, celebrating with interviewees and talking to people in person about the book, the actual book itself being the same has been kind of an interesting thing because it exists,
That's great. Well, I think we're sort of rounding up, so I think it might be time to break out the Keen Question Bowl.
Yeah.
Question Bowl.
Wow, I love that bowl.
Okay, it's not at all a mixing bowl. Don't worry about it. It's quarantine. Okay, so Keen Question Bowl is like a lightning round. They're just a bunch of like getting to know you questions. I'm going to pull them out randomly just so we can kind of get some more tidbits about you. Okay. Let's see. Here we go. Okay, do you have any bucket list items? I know you said you always wanted to write a book. Check. Is there anything other like big?
This is a wild card, but I've always wanted to go to like the depths of Russia. So like I really, that's the one country that I want to visit more than anywhere else.
That's so exciting.
Yeah.
Maybe when travel is back, you can plan. Yeah.
I'd love to see the Be More Chill Rush in production.
Yeah.
Me too.
Okay, do you have any, I know you said you were the butler nanny. Do you have any first audition song monologues? Like what was in Tiny Jen Ashley Tepper's book?
Do you know, I joked about this the other day. A Trip to the Library and Miss Bird were 2 big ones. So I guess I was just a big Sally Mays fan, which like I love.
Right.
Those were 2 big ones for me.
That's amazing.
So funny.
I hope that somewhere there's video evidence of these that we'll unearth one day.
Wait, is that like completely coincidental that they're just both Sally Mays roles, or were you actually a young Sally Mays fan?
I definitely was.
I recognize that. I was like a young like Malcolm Getz. Like I was like whatever he's singing, that's in my book when I'm 12.
Absolutely. No, I was just a big fan. That's a little bit of a coincidence, but I love both those songs too.
They're classics. Now we know you are an SAT coach, but do you have any crazy like day job stories? What was your craziest day job you ever had?
That's a great question. I was a hostess at Roadhouse Grill in Boca Raton, which is the restaurant where you're allowed to like chew peanuts as a patron and spit them out and throw them on the floor and stuff.
Yes, totally.
Glamour.
That's definitely one of the most glamorous jobs that I ever had.
My dad recently went to a year ago, went to a steakhouse that was not that steakhouse, and they also had peanuts and just instinctively put them on the floor. And the waitress was like, "Excuse me, sir." He was like, "Oh, I'm so sorry."
Yeah, I think it's so amazing when you work somewhere where you can do that. What else people want to do and put on the floor, and oh man,
you're just throwing stuff around, I'm sure. Do you have a most used emoji? Do you have a favorite emoji?
It's definitely the heart, but I will say I use the eye roll a lot, but kind of in a fun, nice way.
That's good.
A loving eye roll.
Yeah.
I love it.
Okay, this is, I feel like, a really tough one. Ultimate dinner party guests.
Oh my gosh, is this like the ghost question? Like it can be anyone dead or alive kind of?
Yes, anyone dead or alive.
Wow. I always talk about like the wanting to be at a dinner party with like Wendy Wasserstein and Ed Cleban. They were, also close themselves. So I'm gonna go with that, but it really does vary from being. I mean, Peter Allen and Liza Minnelli would also be fun.
We can make it at 4 Top. You guys can all be together.
Exactly.
Perfect.
That's quite a group, those two pairs.
I agree.
Okay, let's see. We already learned that. Okay, least favorite chore. I feel like this is big during quarantine. Is there anything you've been like, oh, no thanks?
Chore. I mean, after a year of quarantine, who isn't sick of doing their own dishes, right?
Yes.
Oh, God.
Absolutely. That's my least favorite. All right, let's see a few more here. Do you have any favorite like belting in the shower jams? Like go to, turn it on, make you feel better?
I will say they're not misheard in a trip to the library. Like
Sure.
for sure. Yeah, I'm gonna go with that because honestly, I do still sing those.
I love it. Trip to the library is just one of the best.
The best. I remember when the She Loves Me revival happened, and I was like, I feel like I'm at an NSYNC concert. This is what people must feel like at Billy Joel because it's like hit after hit after hit. Like,
yeah.
She Loves Me. Every song is just a freaking hit.
So
Truly.
good.
It really, I mean, it really does have that like Songs for New World, like song cycle feel to it, you know? My God, I love that show.
Every song, a masterpiece. Like, I just love everything about that musical.
Truly. Ugh.
Do you have any backstage rituals? Or like pre-show, opening night, and kind of that kind of stuff?
You know, one of my favorite things to learn about during my books was like what traditions theaters that are on the same block have with each other. You know, like the Neil Simon and August Wilson opening the windows and like screaming to each other at 5 minutes to curtain. It's all the little things, or like the theaters that share alleyways, all of that stuff. I find those things because of proximity to be like incredibly special, and just like I think the people that you pass on the street every day because you're on the same block doing the show, like those are around, that's like kind of my favorite traditions.
Yeah, I think that's incredible. And one of the things that you don't know until you that you don't understand about Broadway is the sort of real estate of the industry is really fascinating that you don't kind of process until you're in the city, I feel like.
Totally. And it's, you know, on 45th Street, I've been thinking about this a lot because of my current book. And like, there's multiple theaters, the Imperial, Minskoff, Jacobs, and Colden, all on 45th Street, all in this book. But it's like there are 10 Broadway theaters on 45th Street, and there are 41 total. So like a huge amount on that block. And there are 2 of the demolished theaters that were built, the demolished to build the Marquee were also on that block. So it's like when you work on that block, it's a different experience from like, and you know, I'm sure there are pros and cons from if you're working at the Nederlander or Studio 54, where you're like the only theater on those blocks.
Yeah. Okay, last one. This has been hotly debated on Keen After Hours. Are you a cake person or a pie person?
I gotta say cake. People always get really mad about this, don't they?
Okay, I'm right there. Okay, it's been hotly debated.
I'm a cake person too, so I'm team #team cake.
But it's like mostly about the frosting for me, and like this is a very weird thing to say too, but like fondant, like I'm a really big fan of fondant. If a cake has fondant, I'm like on board.
That is fascinating. You're like the only person out there. That is wow.
It's disgusting.
So we talked about this before, but I don't think we talked about this to our audience. But your birthday has just passed. Did you have an epic birthday fondant cake? I hope so.
I actually had cupcakes, and they were amazing and very like sophisticated cupcakes. I loved them. But you know, I'm not totally anti-pie. I will say that now I just think of like the way that the Brooks Atkinson smelled like pie during Waitress, and that's a nice memory. So you know, we like pie too.
Awesome.
Well, on that note, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It was just such a pleasure to, and really quite inspiring to hear about your journey and all the work you've done, and just such good luck tomorrow. I hope you have a wonderful day celebrating. It's so impressive.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me and for doing everything that you guys do. Like, as you know, I'm like a huge Keen Company fan. So thank you. I'm honored to be here.
Well, we think the world of you, and we look forward to welcoming you back to the theater very soon, knock on wood.
Yeah. It needs to be back in a theater watching a show of yours.
It's exciting.
Well, be well, and thank you so much again.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right.
Everyone.
Awesome.
I cannot wait to read that book. We'll drop a link in the bio of the video and the comments for everybody to get their copy. That is so exciting.
I didn't realize it was so big.
And covers so many theaters.
Yeah. I love that. Those are my favorite kind of theater books.
Absolutely.
Nice and chunky, man. Give me a paperweight.
All the dish.
Absolutely.
One of my favorite through lines of Jen Fresh, the Tepper story, is how much of her work was just sort of from asking, just cold asks, just calling people up, just writing letters.
Getting Marvin Hamlish to come to your school.
Yeah, definitely inspiring.
And especially now, that's what I've been really inspired by. And like quarantine is the time to be doing that and schedule rooms with people. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Although the other inspiring thing she said, or that I appreciated, is don't put so much pressure on yourself. You don't have to write King Lear over quarantine.
Right, exactly.
Well, I'm working on a King Lear musical right now, but outside of that, I think
it's unrelated though. It's a different.
Is it
a different King Lear? Yeah, it's a different.
Is it with Chuck and Lily Cooper?
Yeah, absolutely. Their dream. Oh my gosh.
All right, we'll clear a space in the season for it then.
What else is happening at Keen Company, folks? Before we wrap up.
Well, it's a big week.
Big week.
Keen Company.
We have the teaser for the next Here Now season of audio theater. This teaser for a piece that's going to be called All We Need Is Us by James Anthony Tyler. That comes out Friday. So if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe to Keen Company's Here Now on your podcast apps so you'll get it immediately, or you can go to our website and listen. We also, this Saturday, March 13th, right around sort of the big anniversary of theaters shutting down, we are producing The Year of Magical Thinking with Kathleen Chalfant. It is a reading video production. More information is on our website. It's a fundraiser benefit for us. Tickets are just $25. And you get to hear sort of like the grande dame of New York theater, Kathleen Chalfant, read this amazing piece by Joan Didion. She also shares some sort of some personal stories and sort of puts it all into context about this year that we've all kind of had a year of magical thinking. So if you know Joan Didion, you're going to love it. If you know Kathleen Chalfant, you're going to love it. If you just love super great storytelling and amazing theater, you're going to love it. So head over to our website. Tickets are just $25 and you get to support Keen Company.
Now, Vanessa Redgrave starred in the Broadway production.
I've heard of her.
On a Facebook post of mine about it, Harry Hahn, a very, another sort of Broadway historian, said, Kathleen Chalfant, our Vanessa Redgrave.
She is. She's America's Vanessa Redgrave.
Exactly.
Amen.
Or you know what? Vanessa Redgrave's a poor man's Kathleen Chalfant. There, I said it.
Whoa.
We're about to get canceled by the network for that.
Hashtag Chalfant.
Man, feud season 2.
Views expressed here are not, not officially Keen Company views.
And then next week on After Hours, we have Brian Herrera, right? Brian Herrera is a artist and scholar and professor at Princeton and is so smart and has amazing nails, which I'm sure we will talk about. But I cannot wait for that conversation.
But we're really on a roll with historians and academics.
Oh my God. Truly. This is a show about knowledge, man. This is edutainment.
Since we learned Johnny is so good at the SAT, I feel like I gotta work. I
know. Hello, Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Well, thank you so much again for joining us on another Monday night. We look forward to seeing you hopefully this weekend for the Year of Magical Thinking, and certainly next week for After Hours. And I want to just say we look forward to seeing you at the virtual theater soon. Good night, everyone.